restorative justice, and part of our training process is also, or has been continually to be incorporated and now expanding around implicit bias and racial justice work. Also that our congregation is part of racial justice work with the ELCA. I'm the liaison for that. Also on our committee is Samantha Pipcorn and Larry Duncan. So raise your hand and just wave so Fred and Raj know who you are. And Jake. Hi, Jake. So one of the things is just bringing more awareness. And in my work, we've been working a lot and thinking about and being more intentional about it. I know that some people here have attended some implicit bias circles, but also, I don't know if you remember when Alice Lynch had come here and done a couple of circles. I'm sorry to say that she passed away on Thursday, very suddenly, and is going to be very missed by our restorative justice and our racial justice group. So, but anyway, we celebrate her today along with having this conversation. And Raj is getting more coffee, which is usually the case. But Fred, why don't you stay? This is Fred Reining. He's been on our board and also a volunteer in our restorative justice, but also has really expressed a lot about his journey from the United Methodist perspective, but also doing implicit bias. So he's going to share some of his thoughts on that. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Raj. So Raj, if you're going to come forward here. So Raj has been our stalwart leader and instigator of change and challenger and helper with us to address implicit bias, racial justice, what our systems are, the colonization, all those terms and words, and moving from that place of being scared, of talking about it, not knowing what to do it, and really helping us to move forward in a way that we can start letting some of those feelings, emotions, and also thoughts work towards change. Yeah. That's okay? Okay.
How's everybody doing? It's like something is in my face. So I apologize. If you can't hear me, please raise your hand. I'll raise my voice. So we'll work together. So like Cynthia said, my name is Raj, and I often shy away from words like leaders. Right? I feel like those are constructed to elevate some and then depreciate others. I want to assure you that this is a journey for me. Right? As much as all of us are born in a culture and a community that has been exposed, ravaged, and informed by slavery and oppression, we are all together as a collective subjected to racialized ideologies. Right? And whether I like it or not, I tend to have those tendencies as well. Unless and until I'm conscious of what I am doing, how I'm thinking, how am I operating. Right? So the idea of racism is part and parcel of our fiber, our DNA, if you will. Right? As Kendrick Lamar would say. Right, anybody fans of Kendrick Lamar? Okay, fans of Kendrick Lamar, okay. I like it. As Kendrick Lamar would say, it's in our DNA, right? To act a fool like that is in our DNA. And that part and parcel is undeniable in the way we all operate. So, in this idea of implicit bias, has been continuously taking over our conversations, whether it's in the field, whether it's in the CEO's office, whether it's in the medical field. Doctors are starting to realize the kinds of implicit biases they have, but are continuously operating with. Right? And lawyers and judges are operating with lots and lots of these implicit biases that they often write off because they often think about races in a certain way, right? So if you will close your eyes and say, imagine who a racist is, most of us, surveys have done, shows that a racist is somebody who walks around with a pillowcase with their eyes cut out, with their dot button boots, right, walking around. That's a racist. And we go back to the South, and unfortunately or fortunately, in the Midwest, we have our share of biases and racist ideologies that inform how we even operate, right? How we even operate as a collective, as a community. So together, we all need to provide leadership in handling and addressing and understanding and responding to implicit bias. Right? This implicit bias has been challenged by many. Oh, what is implicit bias and explicit bias? Right? Somebody mentioned the Super Bowl. Fascinating, right? The cost of that building, that humongous mammoth building, is about $1.2 billion for a bunch of men in tight pants. They look good. Right? In tight pants, running around some stupid ball, which is fine. I mean, it's a game we all want to go watch today. Everybody's revving up to go watch. Go Vikes, right? No. No. But let's imagine, it took less than a year or two for us to keep pushing governance and our policies that help to set aside funding, right? And this came on top of the $550 million that we spent for a bunch of men in tight pants hitting a ball, right? And we call it the, what is that, Target Center, whatever that thing is, right? So the baseball and Super Bowl has, but we are willing to spend this amount of money. Unfortunately, we have all of these other issues and problems that we refuse to address because those problems also present themselves in a way that that our policies have been informed in the past, because majority of the people who present those kinds of issues in our city, one of the most segregated cities, right, Twin Cities, are people of color. So there's explicitly, we have said, these people are not worth our time and resources, but we will spend money on entertaining people in a different way. As Rush Limbaugh very clearly said, right, talk about explicit racism, right, and racial ideology. Rush Limbaugh was in the process of buying the Rams, I think, and somebody asked him, I said, why, anybody here fans of Rush Limbaugh? Okay, everybody's with me. They all are awake. The crowd is awake. Okay, so anybody know the name Rush Limbaugh? How many of you bought his ties? No, just kidding. Okay. Rush Limbaugh said that I want to see black gangs go to war every Sunday and be entertained. Right? Rush Limbaugh came out and said, why? That's entertainment. That process is still very much alive. And so when you see that explicit part of that racism, we say, I am not that. I'm not Rush Limbaugh. I don't listen to his show. I don't buy his ties. Right? I don't take opioid pills like he does. Right? But for the most part, though, we all have implicit biases that we operate under. We may have sort of walked away from that racist past, but we still live in segregated neighborhoods. Right, wrong, good, bad is not the issue. I don't want any one of us to walk out of here feeling guilty and shameful. Right? If So I'm gonna, is it okay if I take this out?
No.
Oh, no.
Just put down the cup there, put it on the stool. That's what they're saying.
Cynthia told me this. So this is racism. This is guilt and shame, right? This is guilt, and this is shame. Right here. When we cover ourselves, right? These are bookends, shame and guilt. And if you walk away with shame and guilt, this is how you operate. Right? You will never ever encounter and discover and realize and respond to the kinds of biases that you and I own. Right? It's part and parcel of who we are. Right? Sorry about the cup. I got to the right page. Thank you. No, I'm lying. Okay. So rather than being guilty and shameful about this issue, it's about understanding how we are made up and informed by biases. Right? Doctors have discovered through research that their biases come as a result of how they even see the client who is approaching them. And when they see African American communities come in, Black community come in, they often see them being able to handle pain more so than the fragile white community. Right? The fragile white community. And as a result of how they operate, then they basically say, no, you can handle this. And this came out in a research just recently that was published as of last week about African American women dying at childbirth more so than any other communities, right? Educated African American women dying at childbirth much larger, in larger numbers than white uneducated females. Right? It's because of the operating mode, with the way they operate, the mode in which they think about who is this recipient and who is this client and what they're saying and how I'm hearing and listening to that message and how I'm responding. Right? And doctors would be the first one to say, I am educated, I'm not racist. Right? But he or she or they are all growing up in this culture where those messages are part and parcel of who we are. Right? Who we are and how we are informed, how we operate, how we see the world. Judges have the same kind of research done, over 20 years of research looking at the way judgments have been passed. Looking through that research, consistently African Americans and Native American Indian communities have been given extensive prison sentencing and probation. Right? We are one of the cultures, world's largest numbers. We have the largest number of people in our prison system, and we also have a large number of people in our correctional system, meaning in our probation system, parole system, right? And walking around with all kinds of monitors, right? That's the fastest industry now. Growing, people are growing. I mean, people are looking for employment in that area. They're looking to recruit more and more people because we believe in not just mass incarceration, but we also believe in mass punishment. Right? Mass incarceration and mass punishment. And majority of the people who are subjected to this mass incarceration and mass punishment as a result of our judicial system are people of color, i.e. African Americans and Native communities largely. Right? And this is true even in Minnesota. Right? You go to some of our counties where we have large Native populations, right? You will see 60-70% of the people in probation, in juvenile, are Native kids. And how do we even think about that when we have an overall population of 1%, native population. 1%, right? 9% of our people in our prison system are native population. 9%, an overall population of 1%, right? 6-7% of African Americans, 40-somewhat% in our prison system are African Americans. And so we look at these type of numbers and we look at the way our judges operate, it is definitely informed by the type of biases they carry, right? School suspensions is the same thing, right? School suspension, researchers say that we have this tendency to look at African Americans as grown-ups much faster than others, right? This is what they call adultism, right? The adultification of African Americans is much, much greater in mindsets of teachers who are mostly white females. So their suspension rate is much larger for African American kids and Native kids and Latino kids. Right? Because they are seen as grown up. You should understand. At age 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, we're suspending these children. Right? Yes, sir.
Have they figured out why that's happening, why they're assumed to be adults so early?
Most of it is because of the way they look at their framework, their build, and their body development. And when they look at them as adults, right? As adults. So from the social psychology perspective, this idea of this idea of implicit bias is very real. It's very real. And from a neuroscience perspective, implicit bias also works, right? So when we operate in a society with a lot of fear, which every day, 3 o'clock in the morning, you and I are infused with fear, right? It comes in the form of tweets. Right? So every day, I'm like, what am I going to be exposed to today? What am I going to be afraid of today? Right? So we are enamored with fear in our culture. And when you operate from fear, where do you often operate from the structural, from your brain perspective? You don't operate from your prefrontal cortex, where you have clarity of thinking, you have time to relax, time to reflect. Where do you operate? You operate from your brainstem. And when you operate from your brainstem, you are operating from fight, flight, freeze mode. Right? So when you operate in that same way, it's easy to go back and unlock those racialized ideologies that we have been taught and operate according to it. Very simple. Right? I don't have to think, it's just a knee-jerk reaction. I don't have to explain anything, I don't have to reflect, because that's all time consuming, and I rather save that energy for something else. So if you look at it from a psychological perspective and a neurological perspective, this idea of implicit bias is very real. Right? Very real. Now, from a sociological perspective, it is also very real, because what we have done, as I said earlier, we are one of the most segregated, Twin Cities is one of the most segregated communities, right? You have Ferguson as seventh most segregated, and our colleagues, friends in the Cheesehead State, which city is that? Milwaukee. Right? Milwaukee is considered to be the most segregated city in the United States. Right? So if you have, and Twin Cities don't fall within that framework of being segregated, and we operate from a zip code mentality. Right? We don't even think about the zip code when we ask, what neighborhood are you from? In the South, at least I was told, right, in the South they asked me, in Louisiana, boy, which side of the railway tracks are you from? I'm like, on this side. Oh, you okay?
Yeah.
Right, but if you're on this side, you're not okay. Right, in Louisiana and Texas, that's how they operate. Here, we operate from that zip code mentality, and it's basically, we know which zip codes are bad neighborhoods. How many of us have heard that term? Bad neighborhood. Right? Ian Haney Lopez calls it the dog whistle politics that we operate with. We use terms that, we don't need to use terms like black and white anymore. We just operate from that particular perspective of which neighborhood you're from. Right? That's due to the segregation. Right? How segregated we are, we basically know. East side, St. Paul. West side, St. Paul. Kenwood, Minneapolis. Kenwood, is that right? Am I saying it right? Kenwood, I have never been there, I just know.
It's a very good neighborhood.
I would imagine. Right? Yes. Right? So it's fascinating because if you go to North Minneapolis, you'll know there are families. There are people who love each other. There are businesses. People going to school, people going to work. But that's overshadowed by the dog whistle calling. Right? Whistle calling and the racist ideology that operates here, because we have images of racism, of who is bad, who's good. And those images are tickled with this dog whistle politics, this dog whistles that we blow. And 45 is not even using dog whistle, he's using a bullhorn. Right? I don't often say his name. What is that show, the book? Whose name shall not be, what?
He who shall not be named.
He who shall not be named. Eric Pardon. I operate that way. I'm probably in denial, so you will have to forgive me. Probably will be in denial for the next 3 years. Who knows, right? So the sociological explanation, the psychological explanation, the neuroscience explanation of implicit bias is very real. We operate from implicit biases, and unless and until you and I are conscious of how we are thinking about all of our narratives and all of our experiences, it's hard to remove ourselves from implicit biases that we carry. We have implicit biases about gender. We have implicit biases about sexuality and sexual orientation. Right? And these biases comes into play all the time. Right? We often, I mean, a very simple example sometimes people use is this idea of you have two qualified carpenters, right? And you want to try to contract with, and you have a female qualified contract, a male qualified contract, but when you offer the contract, most often it goes to the male.
Yeah.
Because in our world, males can build houses. The females can't. They can keep the house. Right? So the operating mode for us is that we have learned these things over a period of time, and now we don't even have to say it. It's something that we just kind of operate under. Right? So how do we catch ourselves? What am I really evaluating them based on? So the invitation is there for all of us to continuously examine how we operate with these racist ideologies. Right? As Dr. Alcott said, history, right? History is never about yesterday, history is about today. Right? So the history of the past is in us, and it is part and parcel of who we are. If we say, oh, that yesterday there was racism, then it's easy to walk away from it, right? In the African traditions in Ghana, they often say you have to operate from Sankofa principle, with Sankofa principle. For those of us who are familiar with the Akan word, Sankofa, simply it means that you always, progress is about moving forward, but remembering where you came from. So the symbol of the bird is about remembering as it moves forward, right? But from a Eurocentric perspective, history is yesterday. Let's move away. Let's forget that. It happened yesterday. Right? And then we look at data, how we do it, we look at data, we have been told that we are, in terms of housing, in terms of wealth distribution, in terms of academic achievement, we are very, very close to some of the so-called southern states, racist states. Right? In terms of mass punishment, we rank alongside Alabama. The number of people per capita who are in our probation system, in our prison system, people of color, we rank amongst the seventh, I think, 5, 6, 7 states, top 5, 6, 7 states. We are in that top ranking states. Minnesota nice. Or is it Minnesota ice? Right? So it's that operating mode. So when we look at these data and we try to understand what is implicit bias and how it operates amongst us, it is not time for us to hide in those covers, shame and guilt. Right? It is time for us to bring ourselves out and face the narratives and say, what are the narratives that is informing me? Right, as Chimamanda Adichie said, right, for those of you who are not familiar with the name, is a Nigerian author, and her famous talk on TED Talk, right, if you have a chance to look at TED Talk, just look for the title, The Danger of a Single Story. The Danger of a Single Story. And we all operate on that single story narrative. You come to this country, you work hard, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you will succeed. Right? And those who don't succeed, we tend to lament and say, genetically, biologically, culturally, these are defects. Easy to dismiss them. Right? And not look at the structural ways in which these communities have been kept down continuously. Right? The founder of the Hull House, who's familiar with the founder of the Hull House?
Jane Addams.
Jane Addams. Jane Addams have conversations with W.E.B. Du Bois and others, and Jane Addams even said, we cannot do anything about the black community. We can work with the Polish community and all of these European communities, right? Jane Addams is hailed as the champion of social justice cause. But in some of the narratives that she even had, she even thought of them as criminals. Right? I mean, these are champions, white heroes and sheroes. Is the kid okay?
Yeah.
He's listening. Yeah. I'm setting him up. So I think we need to think about, this idea of how we counter white fragility. Because white folks, for the most part, want to feel good, right? White folks have been fighting for social justice, to eradicate racism, to undo slavery. But we often operate from this perspective of they are slaves. No. We have to understand that they were enslaved by our systems and structures. And it takes individuals to operate on that. And then towards that end, I want to appreciate Fred and the work that he has been doing. I want to invite Fred to kind of figure out, talk to us about how
I'm trying to change things. I'll try to speak loudly too. My name's Fred Royning, and
everybody give it up, Fred.
I'm just a white guy doing up here talking about implicit bias and social justice. I'm here because Cynthia asked me to come. And as Raj was speaking, I was trying to figure out where I would start with this. And actually, why am I here is because I'm a first-generation American. My dad, my grandfather arrived here in 1937, 36, I can't remember for sure, off the boat from Germany. My grandfather was a Lutheran minister, a member of the Confessing Church. If you know what the Confessing Church was, he stood up and spoke out against the regime, Hitler. So they came here, and I thought I had this wonderful narrative. And of course, the rhetoric of the 2016 elections got me going about emigration. And I have a daughter who is involved in refugee resettlement as a profession. She works in that most racially segregated city of Milwaukee, working on bringing those people from those blank hole countries into this country. So I got revved up. I said, I need to do something. I need to think about this. I thought of my other Lutheran minister grandfather, who would tell me stories about never forget that you had, he was ethnically German but Hungarian, you had relatives fighting on the barricades in 1848 with Louis Kossuth against the oppressive Austrian dictators. So all those things are in my narrative that I would think about. That's one side. The other side, the other part of the narrative that I had, I went to one of the most privileged white universities in the South. White male privilege at the time. I went to Washington and Lee from 1973 through 1977. At that time it was all male, and there were 10 African Americans on campus. And one of those 10 was my best friend. And he still is a friend. We don't see each other as much as we used to. But I never realized it while I was there, how I only knew that I had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that I really didn't like it there. But I had my friends, and I spent 3 out of 4 years there. I did a junior year abroad. But now, many years later, I realized what was going on. And part of the reason I realized what was going on was very many late nights with my friend Larry, looking at himself, and this is probably after one too many beers, I'm sure, saying, why am I this color? And now years later, it breaks my heart to think about those conversations with Larry. So that informed me. And then also, you know, there was the SAE house, where if you weren't born south of the Mason-Dixon line, you didn't dare join. But at the same time, there were certain elements of that school that were wonderful. An honor code that was built up based on what Robert E. Lee did at the university. There's a reason why I'm setting all this up. And it was important to me, and I felt very tied to that. And there were certain aspects of it that I thought were really, really important. So that's the other part of me. And then one other very important person in my life was my boss, Bob, my mentor. From about mid-90s to 2000, I worked for Bob, African American. And I gotta tell you, it was really hard. I had to be perfect because Bob was paranoid. He's paranoid because he didn't want anyone to say, well, you know, the reason Bob got, Fred's clearly smarter than he is, and the only reason Bob got promoted was equal opportunity. So it was tough sometimes. In fact, I remember 2 stories in particular. I came into his office one day. I'm a marketer, and I was complaining about the color on labels. And of a particular product, and I was complaining something about the colored labels, and I kept saying the colored labels. Finally, Bob stopped me and said, "Fred, what are you saying?" I said, "I'm saying the colored labels." "Well, what's wrong with that?" "Say it again, Fred." "The color." "Oh, I'm sorry." So okay, that's important. Then actually, there's 3 stories with Bob. One other time, he and I are in California. We're sitting down with a vendor. They're going to make a video for us, an educational video for us. And I've been the main contact because I'm the guy doing the work, but Bob's got the purse strings. And they're talking to me like I'm making all the decisions. And it got really uncomfortable. Finally, I had to say, "Well, you know, Bob really isn't. Bob's in charge, and it's going to be his decision." You could have heard a pin drop when they realized what they had done. And then the final story is, we were in Miami once, Miami Beach. We were having dinner together, just the 2 of us. We had been at a conference with a lot of doctors. I'm in the med tech world. And Bob was always buttoned up. I mean, just so buttoned up, and wound tightly. But he was relaxed that night. It was amazing. I was like, "Who are you? Where did this person come from?" And finally he said, "Oh, you know, I'm sorry." I said, "Well, there's no reason to be sorry. It's kind of nice to see you relaxed." He said, "Well, I'm going to the Caribbean tomorrow." We had a manufacturing site in Puerto Rico. And I said, "When I go to the Caribbean, I don't have to worry about being black anymore. I don't have to worry about people not accepting me for who I am." So those are the sort of things that informed me, but I still didn't know where I was going with this journey. But Raj has been helpful. He's helped me teach me the difference between racism and bigotry. Understand what institutional racism means. And the other part of the story, and I'll make this quick, and Cynthia asked me to talk about this, is, so you go to Washington Lee University, and you have a problem called Robert E. Lee. And in fact, there was an article, with all the statues coming down, and I was all getting up in arms about, oh, he's this great man, and I started realizing, well, he really wasn't. He was a traitor. And, owned slaves. And of course, there's some controversy whether he really meant to or not. But at the end of the day, he's a flawed man of his culture. And it is what it is. There was an article, op-ed article last spring, by a recent graduate who said, "It is time to change the name of the university. Get rid of Lee's name." Well, I got to tell you, it's hard. You go to a place and you do affiliation with it, but the university took it quite seriously and established a commission to look at this. And the university found out it owned slaves, and they have a commission to deal with that. And at one point, you have Lee Chapel, where you have this beautiful statue of Lee lying in state, this marble statue. At one point, up until 2014, he was surrounded by Confederate battle flags. Those have gone away. They're now down in a museum where they belong. But every Lee Jackson Day, in Virginia, it's not MLK Day, it's Lee Jackson Day. And MLK Day, but Lee Jackson Day. Well, on Lee Jackson Day and other events, we'd always have these. It wasn't so much when I went there because it wasn't as big a deal, but you'd have the lost causers show up. These guys would show up on campus. It had nothing to do with us. This is just a university, but they treated it as a shrine. In Lexington, Virginia, you've got Stonewall Jackson's grave and you've got Robert E. Lee's grave. So it is like ground zero. So the university is struggling with this, what to do. So they established this commission. And of course, you've got a lot of alumni saying, "Over my dead body, don't change it. I'll cut off all funds, never send you anything ever again." And I got inundated with the emails, and I started looking at them, and I started reading some of these petitions, and I started looking at who had signed them, and I realized, going back to what I said, I had this feeling the pit in my stomach when I went here. I didn't like those guys when I went to school. Why would I agree with them now? Why would I not agree with my friend Larry, who felt so uncomfortable there? But yet he persisted, and I helped him persist. And in fact, what the university is now doing is they had a period where they've done listening sessions with the alumni, with students, to say, what should we do? So I participated in one of these, and I was reluctant to say anything. You could speak if you wanted to, but I was afraid to speak up. I didn't want to speak up. But then so I listened. And they had 20 people speak, and it was a gamut from people who said, well, was pleasantly surprised. There was no one that said, over my dead body, don't dare do this. There were people that said, I would prefer not to. This is important to me for traditions. We had one young woman, because, oh my God, we segregated. We allowed women in mid-80s. And actually that raised the value of my education, because women clearly do better grades. So one young woman who spoke, and I felt so bad for her because she spoke up very vehemently against the frat boy culture there, and it was the definition of male supremacy. It truly is. I recognize now in retrospect. So we went through all this. I was pleasantly surprised. It seemed like where the consensus is going is we need to do something. It is a school of privilege. We need to teach these students that are coming there that they have privilege and what to do with it. Then the last call, class of 41. And I'm thinking, oh no, here it comes. Here comes the over my dead body. Well, yeah, where I'm going is you can guess the punchline. That's exactly what didn't happen. The man spoke eloquently about Washington and his gift of money to the university in 1796. And he got on the lead. And he said he may have done some wonderful things, but he was a traitor. And he should be taken away from the university's name. And I was shocked. I was frankly shocked. And where it has left me is like, you know what? The community needs to speak about this and decide. And it's okay to live with that uncomfortable feeling in the pit of your stomach. But if what comes out of this, what comes out of all this is a discussion of people like me with other people understanding and trying to elevate. Because at the end of the day, like it was written, I can't remember the author's name, but White Like Me. Okay, Tim White. Yeah, Tim White saying he had spoken at a college campus about racism, and his answer, and there was an African-American young woman in the background shaking her head, clearly being angry at him, and spoke and said, you're just like every other white guy. You feel bad, and that's why you're doing this. And what he said, it says in the book later, is what he realized was, it wasn't he needed to do something to elevate others. He needed to eliminate racism to improve himself, that it diminished him. And I think that's important. And finally, I am involved a lot in Methodist Church where I go. In fact, I'm on our, the Minnesota Conference has, like the Lutherans do, a commission on race and religion. So I'm participating in that. And one of the interesting things there is you want to be faith-based in what you're doing. And you think about some of the stories in the Bible. One of the longest stories of Jesus speaking to anybody is with the Samaritan woman by the well. She's an outcast. Jesus always reached out to the outcasts. And his rules were simple. Love God, love your neighbor. It's that simple. And if you do those things, but you got to do it with the right approach. It's not a colonial approach, it's the right approach of being open. I think now
So I just want to let Fred and Raj know that people leave to go to fire, so don't worry about that. But how is this journey from when you started this to where you are now? What was that process like?
So it's interesting the other thing was I'm in the med tech world, and I've been traveling a lot. I've got a client that I work for that's doing a clinical trial. And I've been in Boston and in Cleveland recently, and the thing that struck me was I look around Cleveland clinics, premier institution in the world. The doctors are all white. Everyone else isn't. The people working the floors aren't. And I have taken it upon myself to be intentionally, I don't want to say just pleasant, but intentionally open to people and speak to people all the time now. And especially people of color. And I'm just trying to be open. Another time when it struck me, like, wow, this is white privilege. I was taking the subway. I was in Boston, and I had to get to the airport from downtown. And I said, oh, I'm not going to take a cab. It's two rides on the T. I know the T well. I'd lived there for a while. Got on the subway midday. It wasn't commuting time. I looked around. Everyone was a person of color practically on that subway. Till we got to Logan. it all changed as soon as we hit the, as soon as I got off, got onto the bus to go to the airport, go to my terminal. The terminal stopped where Avis was, in came everybody that looked like me. And right there, that, in a way, that's white privilege. You don't even think about it in those terms. I look at things very differently now, is what I mean, maybe what I'm saying. And it's that different lens that you start looking at.
I want to say something about,
What is your name?
my name is Paul, and you can probably tell from my accent that I come from someplace south of Albert Lee. But I've lived in Minnesota for about 20 years, and I just finished teaching. I retired from the U, and I taught the Minnesota history course there, as well as teaching a course on the Civil War in the American West. And one of the things that's driven me crazy about Minnesota is this tendency to oversimplification. And I think that your comment about the European lack of historical identity was just factually wrong. I mean, I think that whole notion of sort of the historical sensibility, in fact, you mentioned the grandfathers, the ancestors, and you said 1948, you meant 1848.
1840, yes, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, yes, I did.
So I think that's just fundamentally wrong, that sense of not being aware of one's history. But saying that, one of the things that I would point out to my students, if you think about, so where we are now in Minneapolis is part of Louisiana Purchase. In St. Paul, if we were in St. Paul, that would be part of the Old Northwest. And one of the reasons for the creation of the Old Northwest was that it would be anti-slavery. And the reason it would be anti-slavery because the institution of slavery was wrong. And it was doubly bad because it brought black people there. And that's the same thing as the Constitution of the state of Oregon. There will be no slavery in Oregon, and there will be no black people in Oregon. And that's something that is just simply not taught. I would tell that to students, and they would go, I never heard that. You know, and they would say, you know, I also never heard about the troubles of 1862 with the Dakota. And they would be honest about it. Milwaukee, in the 1964 Democratic primary in Milwaukee, George Wallace damn near beat Lyndon Johnson. And that was what George Wallace started paying attention to. He said, I've got this built up support, pent up support across the northern tier, right from there. The other thing I'd like to say, and it pays nobody any good to defend Lee right now, but I find Lee is basically like Little Crow. You know, the historiography of Lee is that he resists secession as long as he can. When he's first commissioned, in fact, for about a year, he's not commissioned by the Confederacy, he's commissioned by the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we may not like to think it, but Lincoln was absolutely out of the ordinary in saying that you cannot secede from the Union. Most everybody thought you could secede from the Union. So I just have to point that out.
Yeah, it's complex.
Yeah, and Stonewall, Thomas Jonathan Jackson was thought of commonly, the people who knew him in 1860, 1861, were thought of him as the most prominent Presbyterian layman in the country. That was his view.
No, I just want, so thank you for that enlightenment. I will say this about Lee, or the legacy of Lee, is that it's that idea of defending slavery, right? Secession was one issue, but fundamentally, at the end of, we understand today, in today's dollar, the slave labor is worth about $1 trillion, right? In today's labor count, the money translated from that in the days of slavery, today their labor equals to about $1 trillion. And no one in the South was about to give that wealth away. So in defense of that, right, this idea of secession, state rights, and all that is another.
But that's not true that nobody in the South was willing to do it. You had absolute abolitionist sentiment among many white Southerners.
But we also have to understand that policies and people in power were not willing to give this up, right? There were sentiments, there were good people, but the idea of slavery and maintaining the slavehood and slave states was part and parcel of what that drove this whole movement towards defending the South and its policies. And at the end of the Civil War, we understand that when money was given to elevate the communities that have been enslaved, those monies were ultimately taken away from communities of color and put towards the development of the South, which also part of that money was spent in erecting the statues that now exist. Right? Many of those statues that you talked about were erected in the early 1900s, late 1800s to early 1900s, partly because that was a way to send a message, right? Send that message of who you are and what you should be afraid of. So there was contentions about it, but I would again go back to this idea of how implicit bias works is that fear that we have had, that memories that we have stored, and those memories are often triggered when our own privileges are questioned and affected, right? Good people participated in racism, right? Good people participated in racism and promoting racist ideology. Yes, they were good, but they were part of the system, part of the way the system functions and structures function. And unless and until we are able to challenge that, right? It's not about feeling guilty or shameful. It is important to understand that I have grown up with racist ideologies. I have taken on ideologies that diminished women and promoted males. I have been imbued with ideas of heterosexual privileges versus homosexuals, right? So I have to really understand how those things operate within me, right? So I want to invite us to think about how you and I need to start working with the frameworks that we have been given. History can be interpreted and translated, but I will say this again and again, that our country's ideology is e uno, right? E pluribus de uno, which is a bunch of crap, right? Because in many we became one, we didn't, right? In one we are many. E una de plures should be who we are. We all understand the wealth and the diversity and the power of diversity. But yet, that diversity is often diminished if it doesn't advantage us. Right? Advantage us. And that's why the deconstructing names and states and statues are important, because it starts to really affect the memories and the collective of ideas that we have, and how those ideas are challenged and we don't operate from fight-freeze mode. So I want to put that out there along with your perspective.
Yeah, and I would just like to say again, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I've argued this for 20 years at the U of M, that we need to have sunglasses off discussion about it. But in doing so, we need to get our facts right.
Sure.
And we need to see not just it's complicated, it's subtle. There are many facts that come from left field that you expected to come from right field, or right field that you expected to come from some other field.
Yep.
And I think that I have seen, this is a huge problem, I think, at the University of Minnesota. It's cause-driven as opposed to knowledge-driven. You judge people based on, oh, I put you in this silo, to use that word. I hate the word silo, like I hate the word diversity. It means nothing. You can just hear it coming, and you know who's going to use it and for what reason. And they're kind of going, oh golly gee, I never thought of that. Well, the problem is a lot of people have thought about a lot of things. And we can read, we can pick up books, we can find the subtlety. And I think this whole business, it again gets me to this. I come from Southern Unionists. My grandfather, Peters, so the Germans, right, from Illinois, were far, far more deep and unapologetic racists than the Stones who were from Mississippi. And they simply had this vision of a grand white country. And slavery was bad because it had contaminated this country with black people. That was not the attitude that my family from Mississippi had. So I just think that, I mean, this is what I've been doing for 20 years and just trying to look at some subtlety which is not necessarily talked about. And I think that actually just saying that as part of our system, well, how many systems? How many systems within?
Well, and I think part of what I really want to bring to you is that we do have, that we need to start creating those places where we have those conversations. Our next implicit bias one is Wednesday at our offices, which is at the Westlake Center, right next to the convention center. It's a 3-hour process, and again, this is not necessarily about, this is about where am I, what are my experiences, how do I move through those, and then where do I take that? So it's that we need to take ownership of our own space, utilize our gifts and talents, and bring that along.
There are all kinds of sociological definition of intersectionality, but where does these aspects and topics and subject matter cross this line? Is this idea that from Ta-Nehisi Coates and other elders who talk about race and race matters often say we understand constructs of racism, then we will clearly understand sexism. We'll clearly understand how sexual orientation is seen in our society and how those things are diminished and depreciated and put to a side if we understand how racism as an ideology operates, right? So racism is an ideological construct, and so is sexism. There's an ideology that guides us. It's not that I don't respect you as a woman, but ideologically that as a woman you are depreciated in our society. And then that ideology needs to be called out, right? And the gentleman here talks about knowledge, and I understand knowledge as a PhD in criminology and sociology. I understand knowledge, but knowledge has not deconstructed my ideological weddedness to racism and sexism and other forms of intersectionality. It is only when I connected with my emotional disturbance, right? When I am emotionally disturbed, as Fred pointed out earlier, that component, that pit in his stomach, unless I recognize with that and reconcile with that emotional disturbance, which led to me thinking, okay, what are the disconnect between these two? And so I would say that understanding intersectionality can begin with understanding the racist ideology that was perpetuated by Shakespeare's play. Anybody interested in Shakespeare here? Read Shakespeare? Right? The Tempest. Right? Tempest was released in Europe in 1619, 1 year before the massive population that came over here. And in that play, he weaved together, right, the constructs of how the native population was seen, written by Columbus and his gang, who crash landed here, right? And collected that stories and how they weaved. That became part of the narrative that Tempest took on in terms of who is coming and who they're going to see, the beast they're going to encounter here, and how the white savior is going to come in and plant the totem and save this world. That ideology is very much part and parcel. So I would say, right, the intersectionality in this construct is that we have used that racist ideology to then put all other constructs in place. Racism, sexism, good people participate in this, right? So we don't want to just constantly say just the bad people, but good people knowingly and unknowingly participate in this.